Okay, so a lot of stuff he got into with the gal from the BBC involved the pay gap and gender inequality and all that kind of stuff, and he broke it down. I think in no particular, I'll play another minute 40-second clip of him talking to the same gal.
You don't think there are barriers in their way that prevent them getting to the top of those companies?
There are some barriers, yeah, like men, for example. I mean, to get to the top of any organization is an incredibly competitive enterprise. And the men that you're competing with are simply not going to roll over and say, please take the position.
So let me come back to my question.
It's absolute all-out warfare.
Is gender equality a myth?
I don't know what you mean by the question. Men and women aren't the same, and they won't be the same. That doesn't mean they can't be treated fairly.
Is gender equality desirable?
If it means equality of outcome, then almost certainly it's undesirable. That's already been demonstrated in Scandinavia. Because in Scandinavia...
What do you mean by that? Equality of outcome is undesirable?
Well, men and women won't sort themselves into the same categories if you leave them alone to do it of their own accord. I've already seen that in Scandinavia. It's 20 to 1 female nurses to male, something like that. It might not be quite that extreme. And approximately the same male engineers to female engineers. And that's a consequence of the free choice of men and women in the societies that have gone farther than any other societies to make gender equality the purpose of the law. Those are ineradicable differences. You can eradicate them with tremendous social pressure and tyranny. But if you leave men and women to make their own choices, you will not get equal outcomes.
Right, so you're saying that anyone who believes in equality, whether you call them feminists, call them whatever you want to call them, should basically give up because it ain't.
Exactly what she's saying. By the way, she's struggling.
But here's what's going on. First off, you can't think this way and have a college degree. You would have never made it through your classes. This can't be your logic. Gavin Newsom is not nearly as goddamn dumb as he came across. Otherwise, he wouldn't have degrees. He wouldn't have risen to whatever. There's no way that you can think this way in a sort of buoyant environment. Now, if you have a super strong bias pushing you in an agenda, then you can think that way. Gavin Newsom had no logical answers about black and Hispanics not having access to checking accounts or whatever. If that's the way you actually thought, you'd take a Scantron test in college and you just stick the pencil in your eye and roll around on the ground. Like, she's not that dumb. But when you have a super strong bias, you come across as dumb. Yeah. And that's the thing. It's like, look, I'm not a Steelers fan and I'm not a Patriots fan. So I'm allowed to go, well, Tom Brady's better than Ben Roethlisberger. He's got more done, more clutch throws, more of anything. Now, if I'm a huge Steelers fan, I have to go, whoa. A lot of those Super Bowls were really close. Yeah. And Tom, if you take a look at those passes, he wasn't stretching the field. A lot of that was check down stuff.
Couple calls.
Belichick's the brains behind. Okay, now I seem dumb. And the reason I seem like I don't know football now,
you're grasping at straws.
Is because I have a narrative.
Right, you're taking yourself.
I chose a side.
Yeah.
And how am I going to land on the right? How am I going to sound smart defending a stupid argument? She came in with an agenda, obviously. Thus, she's not listening, and she's shoving in her own stuff.
She's taking his information and snapping it to a square hole to a round peg. The argument that's come out the other side is so absurd. So you're saying it's like, no.
I think at one point he starts laughing. He's like, that's not what I'm saying.
But that's how, and also, when you do a thing where you go, oh, so let me just summarize what you're saying. All women are stupid. It's really hard to then have a debate to correct whatever it is you want to correct to the amount that you can correct it. Like, he goes on to say, men and women are different, so no, things can never be the same. And to force them to be the same is sort of tyrannical. To go, there were this. Okay, so there's 100 nurses, and there's 20 female nurses, and there's one male nurse, and then there's 20 or 19 engineers and one female engineer. All right, males who wanted to be engineers, we're going to have to get fitted for a nurse's outfit, and then nursing women, we got to push you over here. That's sort of tyranny. Yeah. They want to do this. That's what they're doing. So the sort of thing, the thing that I've always screamed about, which is, hey, shouldn't the fire department reflect the community? That's not if Asian women don't want to be firemen. Not if that's not their thing. Not a lot of people's thing. I just want the best fireman or the best engineers, the best nurse. Don't you want the best nurse? Like male, female, whatever the ethnicity is? Why are we trying to construct that? And why is that progress? Like it's what I always yell about. Not everything's progress. This forcing of is not. Progress is here's the progress. For that one female out of the 20 who is an engineer, did something impede you? Were there male professors saying you'll never make it as an engineer? Did you have folks trying to push you the other direction? Did you have folks refusing to look at your look at your papers to get an engineering school or whatever?
Because you were a female.
Right. That's all the stuff we need to always keep an eye on. And then after that, people are just going to scatter where they scatter.
I want to say something else about the Jordan Peterson, Cathy Newman interview. So something's emerged that is really quite troubling, and I think most people know this, is that Cathy Newman's being harassed by people who purport to be fans of Jordan Peterson, and maybe they are. Maybe they're a bit too rabid, and they are attacking her for her viewpoints. Now, we saw during this interview an example of how to act and debate with people who do not share your beliefs. Peterson was respectful. He presented evidence. He related to her warmly and with humor. And, there's a couple of minutes where I believe he even won her over. So this, again, as he has said, and as we should really be taking to heart, this isn't about being right. It's about making things better. So Peterson has been, let's just say ridiculously, as he says, helpful to me in terms of improving my life and making it more meaningful. Not the least of which is, his reading list, for one. So I believe he's probably done the same for you. And so don't we owe it to him to be impressive representatives of his work and his attempts to improve the state of affairs? I have an intuition that this, right now, with this book and this interview, that this is a turning point. I think that the world is really going to be exposed to his ideas on a level that heretofore has not been the case. So now is the time to take stock of our behavior and how we act in terms of being fans or people who have been positively influenced by Peterson, who believe in his message and who want to share his message and would hope to transform other people to understand how beneficial this message is. So my sense is that it's time for us to act diplomatically as ambassadors for Peterson, and not to fight with our adversaries, but to treat them in the way that is the best way, which is the way that Peterson treated Ms. Newman. So that's, I guess, really all I have to say about that. I would be interested in feedback, and thank you for listening. One last point I want to make is that at one time I shared a lot of Cathy Newman's beliefs, and I suspect those of you who are over 30 or over 40, even some of you who are younger, may have done the same. I mean, you can call it being red-pilled, but I think that's simplistic, because I don't even know if Peterson's views could be considered political in terms of previous political stances. I think this is something kind of new. So keep in mind that if your mind can be changed, so can other people's. And when I listened to Cathy Newman at one time, I would have been in her shoes as well. So keep in mind that, as Carl Jung says, in some form or another, we contain all aspects of the human experience. So be kind, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you so much, Tucker.
Professor Jordan Peterson has been compared to dictators like Mao and Hitler because he won't let others dictate what he says. A brave man, one of the few. Next. Everywhere in modern society, you are ordered to conform, and if anything, it's getting more conformist, from gender to immigration. Pick your issue. There's increasingly only one acceptable view, and you can be ostracized or fired for disagreeing. Many are, in case you haven't noticed. University of Toronto professor Jordan Peterson stands dramatically against this tide. He's become famous in large part because he refuses to be shamed from the public square for having his own opinions. Last week, Peterson left interviewer Cathy Newman, not a genius, speechless when explaining that people do not have the right not to be offended. Watch this.
Why should your right to freedom of speech trump a trans person's right not to be offended?
Because in order to be able to think, you have to risk being offensive. I mean, look at the conversation we're having right now. You know, like, you're certainly willing to risk offending me in the pursuit of truth. Why should you have the right to do that? It's been rather uncomfortable. That's fine. I think more power to you, as far as I'm concerned.
Except you haven't sat there and... I'm just trying to work that out. I mean...
Ha, gotcha.
You have got me. I'm trying to work that through in my head.
Really one of the great interviews of all time. By the way, you should say Jordan Peterson has a new book out, 12 Rules for Life. That clip is everywhere. Jordan Peterson joins us tonight. It's an honor to have you, Professor. So I've watched you for a while. I've always thought you were a truth teller. One of the chapters in your book is tell the truth. That's one of your rules. What are some of the things that you think we're forced to lie about in this moment?
Well, I don't know if we're forced. I think we make a choice. That it's sometimes a bitter choice, but that's often the case when you're deciding what to say. But my sense is often you're in a situation where you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, so you might as well pick the poison you'd rather take. And you have a moral obligation to do that. So, you know, if you're going to say something unpopular and you're going to get attacked for it, that's a risk, but to shut up and pretend that you think something different is to warp your soul, and that's a much bigger risk. So
yes, it is. So why I would think that even if they didn't agree with you, that people in the media would be thrilled by the way you comport yourself, the way you respond, because clearly you're saying what you really think, and that's supposed to be our charge as journalists, is to tell the truth.
Well,
and yet you get met with these hostile receptions. Why do you think that is?
Well, I would say that's not universal. There's a big battle being played out in the press, say over the Cathy Newman interview. There are people who are casting her as a victim because she's been vilified as a consequence of the interview. But there's been many, many people in the media who stood forth and said that it's necessary to be able to say what you think. So it's not a battle that's over yet. Yeah, it's good. It's good. Surprising, but good.
So if you, in the book, you have a number of these rules, and Rule 5 just jumped out at me as a father. You said, here's a rule. Don't let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. What does that mean?
Well, it means, first of all, that you should understand that you are actually capable of disliking your children, and that because you're larger and more powerful than them, if you let them misbehave in a way that makes you dislike them, you're going to take revenge on them in a very bad way, and sometimes over decades. I've seen that as a clinical psychologist. But more importantly, if your children behave in ways that make you dislike them, assuming you're reasonable, and that might be something you want to discuss with your wife, then other people are going to dislike them too, other adults, and then they won't teach them things, and they won't pay attention to them, and they'll only smile falsely at them, and other children won't want to play with them and include them, and that's a catastrophe for your child. So it's very helpful to help your children behave in ways that make other people welcome them, because then everywhere they go, they're welcome. And there's nothing better you can do for a child than that.
Very smart. In the minute we have left, if you could pass on one piece of life advice, and this really is a book of life advice, to our viewers, what would it be?
Stop saying things that make you weak.
What does that mean?
Well, if you pay attention to what you say, you'll know that sometimes you feel like you're standing on a rock, that you're in a solid place, and I suppose that you're speaking from your heart. And other times you're saying things just to look good and just to buttress your particular status at the time, and that makes you feel weak. You sell yourself out. And if you pay attention to what you say, you can tell when you're making yourself stronger, and you can tell when you're making yourself weaker. And unless you want to be weaker, then I would say it's best to say those things that make you strong. And you can learn to do that, and it's really useful. So I would recommend practicing that because it's good for you and good for everyone else too. And so
there's a reason people obsessively watch your YouTube videos. Professor, thank you very much for joining us. Congrats on the book.
Thanks very much.
Turns out a scandal is rocking the limited but vigorous world of Saudi beauty